So welcome everyone to our second EMBED Talks podcast. Today we are talking about how change can impact our personal wellbeing. So thanks for joining us. We hope you managed to catch our first one where we were talking about social media and heritage, and we'll give you the links to our websites and YouTube channels at the end of this session. First, I want to move on to our wonderful guests today. So I've got the pleasure of being joined again by Becca Morris. Hello, Becki.
Hello, Sarah.
How you doing?
Very well, thank you. It's a really beautiful day today.
It is a beautiful, it's a bit windy where I am. I'm in a windy world today, but yeah, it is a beautiful day again. Sun shines, makes it help. I'm not going to get my words out today on this podcast. The weather helps is what I was trying to say. It's Friday. So do you want to just give people a little bit of an intro to yourself again, for those that didn't join on the first podcast?
Yes, certainly. So I'm Becki Morris. I'm the director of the Disability Collaborative Network in the Heritage and Culture sector. And DCN is an EMBED partner and works to support intersectional inclusive practice in the service provision, working practice and workforce in museums and heritage organisations across the country. And one of the things that we do in particular is we work across sectors. So, and that's how we met, wasn't it, Sarah?
It
was, and we work together now, and we're sharing such goodness at the moment in what is a very financially challenged sector, particularly with the lockdown. So we really want to do some good and do some help in respect to the cultural sector, which is why we're offering a variety of resources and support to all of the cultural sector right now.
Absolutely, we're offering a lot of goodness. I like that. Yeah, that's the aim, isn't it? To offer a lot of goodness. And you and I are also joined today by the wonderful Amber O'Brien. Hello, Amber.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for giving up your time. I know you're really busy right now. So Amber, everyone knows who I am because we're running the podcast here in bed. Could you just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, Amber?
Yeah, sure. So I am the founder and lead training consultant of Headworks. Headworks is a company specialising in training for mental health at work. We also offer consulting, and we run wellbeing workshops run by clinicians. So just a bit about my background. I'm a registered mental health nurse. So I've been in nursing for around 15 years. And I've worked in lots of different settings in the NHS and private sector, so inpatient, community nursing, and then on to practice development, management, commissioning. And I started to develop a real interest in mental health at work because over the years I found myself working with many, many patients who struggled to find and maintain employment. It just became something I became really interested in. Looked more into it, and yes, decided to move into this world. So that's a bit about me.
And how are you finding this world?
I'm finding it very interesting. I think there's a lot of there's significant gaps in research, obviously compared to the NHS and the healthcare world, where there's tons of research funded. I think it's something that people are really passionate about, which is great. There's a lot of conversation about mental health at work. Some probably more helpful than others, but I think obviously all conversation is positive. So it is interesting, and there's obviously, I think at the moment, a huge need for considering mental health at work and for support in that area. Sorry, I think my audio's gone a bit funny.
No. Right, bear with me. I'm just going to stop the recording because my earpods have just shifted gear. 2 seconds. Yeah, very interesting world, Amber. Thanks for sharing that. And I know there are lots of great conversations happening at the moment. Becki and I are fortunate enough to work across sectors. That's the whole principle of EMBED. And we're definitely seeing the conversation of mental health and wellbeing being had more. But to your point, I think there's more work that needs to be done to make sure we're having the right conversation around mental health and well-being. And certainly you see the same as well, don't you, Becki?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's the idea that everybody can be affected by their mental health, and also in terms of what we can do to support each other in talking about how we're feeling, but also what kind of positive opportunities there are to embed structures and support, so we can actually feel that we can talk about it openly without any kind of fear to our employment, or also in terms of our own spaces as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where we find ourselves right now, extremely challenging and worrying times. And we've already said there have been some great supportive conversations happening to help people through lockdown and through planning that it's going to take them forward. But when we consider impact, Amber, what impact can change have on people, or rather, what is the impact because of change on people, and therefore what do we all need to consider and think about?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're really, as humans, obviously we're equipped for change. We change throughout our lives. We go through many transitions and change processes. If you think back, on your life, all of the change that you've been through, whether it's, from childhood, going from primary school to secondary school, then to university, or straight into a job. And if you think back at all those times, there was a certain level for all of us of vulnerability. Because it's about new beginnings and going into the unfamiliar and letting go of the past. And obviously a really important kind of factor when you're in those positions of change is kind of the support around you, the protective factors, and that can really influence how we respond to change. But also just our personality types, if we tend to be quite anxious people anyway, or we've had some bad experiences with change in the past. So all these things can have sort of can kind of influence how change might impact us. And I think the important thing to consider at the moment is the change that we all found ourselves in, in terms of lockdown, massive change in working practices, is that A, it's completely sudden, and B, we have had no control over it. So it hasn't been a choice. It hasn't been, it's not I'm going to apply for a new job or I'm going to get married. It's we've all found ourselves in this uncontrollable change. And I think that's the key. It's the impact that the kind of change that we can't control has on us, because obviously that level of uncertainty massively raises anxiety and stress. And we know through research that the worst kind of change is the kind of change we can't control, because it does impact on stress levels.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and is it that the lack of control that people feel? Do you think it's that really throws us off when change happens, when that real impactful change happens? Do you think it's that at the heart of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, control is something we all really need in our lives to help us feel, secure and happy. And when we don't have that, we don't know what's going to happen, we naturally have that feeling of anxiety and stress. And for various reasons, some of us are better equipped for dealing with that and some of us aren't. But yeah, I think that's such a big factor, that kind of that lack of control and that uncertainty that comes with the current time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see it and I feel it every day. So we work with many clients that have got worries, that the people within their organizations are worrying. I even see it more locally and personally. So the times we find ourselves in, there are lots of WhatsApp groups that we've set up, right? So I've set one up for my family, for the female members of my family, without being sexist, but for the aunties and the cousins, all the girls to have a chat. And I've got to say, I do see the difference in the conversations and the thought process within that WhatsApp group in terms of how people are responding to being locked down and not being able to see each other and not being able to go into work. One of my aunties has got her own business and she's not able to go into the hairdresser's salon to see her clients, to have that daily contact. And she's she's, you know, finding that quite tough. That's quite a big shift, but also something, to your point, that you just can't control. And then there's other people like myself. I'm okay with change. So you do see that difference in how people are reacting. I know, Becki, you and I, we've seen that to varying degrees as well, haven't we, across the sectors?
Yeah, definitely. And I think because also with the lack of control, if you've got a neurodiverse or person, you're a neurodivergent profile, that in turn can also trigger anxiety in how you can manage with your strategies, and also in regards to information. I feel that sometimes we can have, it's important to stay up to date and absolutely vital, but sometimes we can be swamped with social media, the 24-hour news channels, and sometimes you feel that it's in a repetitive circle of quite negative influences, when actually sometimes you need that balance to sort of reflect upon what's happening, but also at the same time thinking, we've all learnt to work from home, we've got certain things that we can control, there are others that we can't, but what can we control, what can we manage in our own houses and things like that, to sort of stay aware of our own mental health, but also in regards to any kind of influences, where it be a neurodivergent profile, or particularly if you're homeschooling and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big conversation, isn't it, about how we more effectively include everyone that's out there working in a really different way, with the worries that they've got, but working in a really different way. It's now more than ever the conversation about mental health and well-being, but on the broader, all-encompassing conversation of inclusion, for me, is pretty critical. I mean, we all work with organisations out there, and we do quite a lot of work around behaviour. And behaviour and bias is impacted by our triggers, and if our ability to respond to change is one of those triggers, then you also see the bias and the behaviour affecting people from underrepresented groups.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, all of them. I mean, Amber, with the knowledge and the experience that you have, you know, you've got lots of great years of experience of offering first-hand support. With that in mind, what guidance would you offer to people when it comes to responding to such an impact like COVID-19 or any other impacting experience?
Yeah. So I think in the current context, I mean, Becki made a really good point about trying to focus on what you can control. So I think that kind of reframing, because we do get into this kind of negative thinking patterns, you know, especially at the moment. So I think that reframing of things and trying to focus on the positives. So it's not necessarily about positive thinking, but it's, you know, it's just taking your focus away from the negative. So I think that's a really powerful thing. But I think also trying to be more present in the moment, because there's so much anxiety, and anxiety tends to be about the anticipation of something that might happen, and it might never happen, and then we're just worrying and ruminating on this and letting anxiety kind of take us over. So I think that presence in the moment is a really, really important thing. And that's why, you know, you'll see, I think mindfulness has probably been, you know, a massive topic of conversation and on trend for a good 10 years now. But that's kind of the theory behind mindfulness, that it is about living in the moment, being in the moment, and being more present. And it's shown to reduce anxiety in the long term. So I'd say definitely things like that are really important. And again, Becki mentioned the news, and I think that's such a stressful thing for a lot of people, and it's something that's really coming up a lot. You know, how do I cope with the bombardment of constant news alerts, and you know, but I mean, my advice to people with that is pretty simple. It's don't read it, which sounds kind of obvious, but I think we can get in that pattern of, we become quite addicted and we keep looking because we want to be reassured, but then we'll read it and then we won't be reassured because it's very alarmist, and it's, you know, so I kind of say to people, if they're finding it really anxiety provoking, just ask a family member or friend to just text you any relevant updates. So if they're, you know, if we've got like an announcement from the government, just ask someone to text you and let you know the facts. And then just look at, if you want some accurate information, looking at Public Health England or the World Health Organization, and just avoiding, you know, the news, because it's not particularly helpful at the moment.
No, and it's such a great point. I mean, you know, when it first started happening, I suppose I would have been one of the ones guilty of watching it too much. And then I think you then skip to different providers of information, different news channels, different publications, and then the information doesn't match. So I've got to say, I haven't stopped watching or reading anything, but I tend to go to one, maybe once a day or once every other day. Just for a quick snapshot, and it's, you know, one that I would hold more weight with in terms of their credibility. But it's so true. There's such a bombardment of conflicting information as well, which
exactly,
to your point,
because it's all going to be preliminary, you know. It's not, you know, scientific, well-rounded evidence. You're going to get the most accurate information, up-to-date evidence-based information from official sources, and obviously journalists are just reporting on things as and when they come in. So we know that obviously research and statistics and epidemiology is all subject to change when we're in a current situation, and we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. But I think, you know, it's just about listening to your own mind and knowing if you're not finding it anxiety provoking, you know, there's obviously no reason you shouldn't look at it. But if you know it's causing you a lot of stress, then it's just about really kind of taking that step back.
If I could just add something to that, I remember when I was growing up, you had the news on at, I think it was 9 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and then at 6 o'clock, and then the evening 10 o'clock news. And I feel that sometimes with the 24-hour news channels, one of the things, I'm very interested in the news. I grew up in a family that worked in newspapers, and one of the things that I find is that with the 24-hour news channels, we've kind of evolved to capturing an audience. So then they are trying to hold your attention. So you keep watching. And I think if you keep that in the back of your mind, they want me to watch. That sometimes that's when you can say to yourself, actually, no, I don't need to know about this now. I'm going to go and do something else and catch up with it at 6 or at 10 o'clock. And one of the things that I do as well is I don't tend to watch it at night before I go to sleep, because otherwise, you know, you're like, oh my God.
It's a really good point now. It's a really good point.
It affects your sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. The conversations, you know, I've had with my mum when she's been watching the news late at night, and I've got like a text going, oh my God, just let's not do it now. Let's both watch it in the morning. So I tend to do it at top of the day. I don't tend to go for a broadcaster or a publication that is very emotive, because I also find in there you've also got somebody else's anxieties and opinions, and I tend to go to more factual places, I've got to say. It's really interesting actually the way in which the media is right now in terms of this current situation. Sorry, Becki, go ahead.
I think as well, one of the things that I do, I remember reading a book about anxiety, and that if you trigger laughter in your head, it releases, I can't remember the name of the chemical off the top of my head, but it actually makes you feel better if you laugh about something. So what I've tended to do is actually have a stockpile of stand-up comedy, of sort of things from the telly, you know, quite light-hearted stuff. And what I do is I tend to watch that at night and just have a bit of a laugh. I know that it will make me laugh, and that in itself I find can actually reduce anxiety in that way, because it's releasing the chemicals that you need.
I know your bonkers sense of humour as well. So I can imagine what you're reading.
Oh, I love the late great Robin Williams every single time.
Favourite actor.
Brilliant. And whenever I put any of his stand-up on, it's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And also Adam Hill's. There's one called Happyism, and it is brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Happyism. Make a note.
Happyism. Yes.
Sorry, Amber, you were going to add.
No, it's all right. No, I was going to say, I think it's just a really good point. And it's about, I think, you know, part of the reason people kind of get a bit addicted to the news is because there's no control. So it helps them feel like, oh, they might be in control if they need to keep up to date with everything, and they feel more involved. But I think realizing that you can't be in control of that, and then actually just thinking, do you know what, I'm going to watch some stand-up comedy. I'm gonna escape for a night because I can't control this and it's just stressing me out, is a really important thing to kind of take away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we start talking about we as individuals, and obviously right now people are in lockdown and they're working in many different ways for many different organizations around the world, but right now people are also starting to think about how do we come out of lockdown. So being able to look forward is obviously really, really important. Organizations of all different shapes and sizes need to figure out how to keep the lights on and how to keep serving the people that they serve, and also looking after the people that serve. So when we think about that, what do people need to think about or do in order to transition effectively? I know people don't like the term the new normal, but I'm going to say entering into the new world. What do people need to consider in order to do that transition effectively when we think about mental health and well-being?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one thing that people need to consider is that we all don't exactly know what that, new world is going to look like. So it's about learning from kind of, the uncertainty that we're all experiencing now, and kind of bearing that in mind and how we're coping with that. But I think, there's a lot of talk about kind of the new ways of working, and that working from home will be much more common. And I know that I think Twitter had recently announced that they've said basically their staff can now work from home forever if they choose to. So that's, I would imagine we're going to see much more of that. And I think something to really, really bear in mind is we're not really used to that way of working, and that has had an impact on mental health and well-being. So we've seen some research come out a couple of days ago. There was a survey done, I think, of about 2,000 people. And on average, people were working 28 hours extra a month from home. And employee anxiety, self-reported anxiety, was up by 50%. And a third of people were saying they were struggling sleeping. So we're already seeing that actually that mental health at work that perhaps was great when on site and in offices is being lost when working from home. So I think it's really, really important for people, organisations and individuals to bear that in mind and see what's kind of what's slipping, and really improving on that for kind of the impending transition and the new world. Because I think there are unsurprisingly many predictions from academics and from mental health professionals that there is going to be a mental health crisis coming. So I think being proactive and really preparing for that is just absolutely vital.
I mean, you and I had a conversation ahead of the podcast, and I think we were both in agreement that organisations, some already opening, some trying to plan effectively, all considering what that means. Like, how do we ensure we sell our products and we have visitors coming into a museum, or we've got somebody walking around the butchers, or whatever the case may be. But in all of that, I think you and I are in agreement that there feels to be a gap. And for me, it's that gap around, but how do we ensure every single day that people are good, that people are feeling included, they're feeling supported, they're feeling enabled? Because it doesn't surprise me actually that there's that many additional working hours being worked, because I think you also, in and amongst all of this change, there's also that element of, whilst people are embracing to a certain degree that element of change in what it feels like to work for an organisation right now, lots of home working, remote working, I think also what you have is the added stress of, does my manager know that I'm working and I'm getting everything done, and do I feel I need to be seen online more? And is the manager feeling they've got the right level of trust in their staff, because you can't see the whites of the eyes? And I think that in of itself, certainly for me, it won't be the factor, but certainly for me will be a contributing factor right now to what people are already feeling stressed about. I mean, I don't know if you both agree.
I was making some notes just now, and that I feel that we've transitioned into working from home, but there's also disruptive factors in regards to that transitioning. So your workload as you adapt to working from home is going to be disrupted in respect to that change. But also if you've got any responsibilities with parents, family, kids, you've got that additional disruption as well as doing your job, which I know that I've heard a lot about recently through various articles. But also I feel that there's that old time-honoured difficulty of keeping up to date and communicating with your team and your staff using things like Zoom and various others techniques to be able to actually bring together and still have that team relationship. Sometimes that in itself can start to drift, as it does with a lot of organizations, but also being able to have that authentic conversation with your manager if you're worried that as we go into the post-lockdown society that we're going to be being asked to do things which we're not necessarily comfortable doing or feel a bit scared to do, and how that actually transitions into that post-lockdown society.
I absolutely agree on the communication piece. I see really great examples of organisations using tech to ensure there's a greater level of a sense of inclusion for their people and communication and connection and collaboration. I see really great examples, and then I see not so great examples out there as well, where we just need to keep encouraging the replication of that good practice. But I certainly see people's individual reactions to the current situation compounding the mental health and well-being of people within organisations, for sure.
I think there's got to be flexibility from all different groups on that person in how they deliver their work, but also in recognition of those disruptions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes down to that, the consideration of the individual, doesn't it? And thinking about that working style, but also, as you said, like childcare or caring responsibilities or sharing a house with loads of housemates, or we're all in different situations. And I think there's a lot of talk around kind of video call attrition. So teams having more meetings than ever, and then having drinks and video drinks, and then on top of that, if a person's then speaking to their family and friends a lot on video, and then they've got kids to look after, it's kind of like there needs to be a balance with a bit of me time as well, because I think we're all kind of lacking that at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably one of the bits of advice I would offer to people. One of the things, I've worked remotely for years. I've always travelled quite a lot in the organisations that I've worked for, certainly travelled quite a lot now that I work for myself. So I've always worked remotely when I'm not travelling. But in order to do that effectively, I had to get pretty disciplined and structured in terms of the start of my working day, the break that I have for lunch, and then when my working day finishes. And granted, there's always going to be exceptions. If I've got a piece of work to get out of the door, or, I've got a late call with somebody in a different country, as an example. But I think having that structure for me really enabled me to ensure there was that balance, because the boundary can become so blurred when you're working from home, and to your point, it then does compound your mental health and well-being. So for me, having that structure and discipline in your hours and your working pattern really helped, and having a separate space, having a space where you go to work, rather than right now I'm sat in the dining room and I could quite easily go, I'm going to go and flick the kettle on again. I'm going to pop a little wash in the machine. But that structure I found really helped.
Yeah, definitely.
I think for neurodiversity, I know with me, I tend to be quite flexible. So if something's bothering me that I haven't done it yet, I will actually say, right, well, what are you going to do about it? And actually focus that time, and then recognize my own kind of working patterns. So if I find that I actually want to work quite late, then I can. But so long as I have that time the next day to do just light tasks and just sort of, do I need to work in the morning, things like that. So you're flexible with your time, but you recognize that to use a time honored saying, don't burn the candle at both ends, so to speak, but recognize those working patterns. I'm thinking of people with ADHD and other profiles.
Kind of leads me on to reasonable adjustments, actually. So I know, for any of the listeners, EMBED is a consortium that I founded that looks to support organisations in regard to inclusion for all underrepresented groups, all protected characteristics. But particularly when you're working in a really different way, you're working from home, reasonable adjustment, certainly for those that would identify as disabled or neurodivergent, reasonable adjustment becomes pretty important. So the communication, the open line of communication with your manager and your team as well, when it comes to ensuring that those people that are working in a different way and they're working remotely and they're working from home also have those adjustments to remove some of the anxiety that then allows them to do their job more appropriately and effectively, I think is also really important for people to consider.
Absolutely.
So then as we look forward, I know, Amber, we're going to be partnering on a webinar series, which is fantastic. I'm really looking forward to us doing that. With that in mind, in terms of the webinar series, we're doing a podcast today and we're kind of touching on the gap that we saw, which was speaking to people about how change can impact our well-being and some of the considerations that people need to have as they're planning post-lockdown. When we enter into a more detailed webinar series, what can we really expect in terms of a conversation there?
So, I think the main focuses will be sort of supporting employee mental health in the current context. So obviously the current context is ever changing. And I think it's really important to get the right message out there and not kind of give generic advice. So I'm really, obviously from a nursing background, I've got a master's in psychiatric research. I'm really keen on evidence-based practice, and I'm really keen to kind of take that over into the mental health at work world. My kind of passion is actually giving people actionable strategies and really empowering them with useful evidence-based knowledge. So that would kind of be, one of the key aspects, actionable strategies for supporting employees, looking at kind of normalizing the conversation around mental health and how to do that in the current context, because that's something we hear a lot. We hear about normalizing the conversation, but thinking about what that actually means and how to do that is not quite so clear sometimes.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Really, no, I was going to say, really looking forward to it. And the point I wanted to come back to is that the evidence-based, we see so many organisations right now doing, do some fantastic things, doing some fantastic webinars and having great conversations. But I think in all of that, it needs to be tempered with how much is it dipped in evidence? How much is it dipped in factual research? We had a really great conversation with a new partner yesterday that Becki and I are going to be doing a piece of work with. We'll give an update to that one separately. But it all came back to how can we offer guidance that's wrapped around an evidence, a factual piece of evidence that we can ensure people are using accurately then to take them forward into post-lockdown world. So really important.
Yeah, definitely. And then, it's going to be more effective if it's actually evidence-based. It's going to have an impact rather than,
It's a sure footing, isn't it?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, because what I find is that sometimes with opinion based sort of work, that often it's through different lenses of what somebody feels is acceptable, when actually it's not really reflecting in other good practice. So I think that would be a really key element, that it's always wrapped in evidence-based research.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we're nearing the end of Mental Health Awareness Week, and I've seen some fantastic campaigns and initiatives and messaging out there this week. I think there was a great panel and a series of conversations at Atos this week, and the conversations that you see happening across museum hours and access chats. And, there's a really great conversation around Mental Health Awareness Week. But of course, Mental Health Awareness Week doesn't mean we speak about mental health only this week. It's a conversation that has to be had every single day of every single year. From you, Amber, in the first instance, and then Becki, I'll come to you. Mm-hmm. Amber, what is the positive action, to your point about being action orientated, what is the positive action that you would want people to take away from this podcast?
I guess kind of the message that, as you mentioned, Mental Health Awareness Week is a week, but, mental health awareness should be kind of for life, and we should be, continually supporting people and each other. And I think, there's the reminder that things can't exist in a vacuum, because it's not going to have an impact culturally at an organisation level. If you've got some managers who are trained in mental health awareness, or you've got some mental health first aiders and nothing else, no strategy, no policy, nothing in place to support and promote that, it's not really going to make a big difference. So I think kind of, the message really is to look at your whole strategy at an organisational level, and just bear in mind, as we've spoken about, we don't know exactly what the new world is going to look like, but we have some kind of ideas about how the workplace is going to change, and we know that mental health in the workplace agenda is going to be really, really important. So I think just bearing that in mind is a really important takeaway, and being proactive about that, and learning perhaps from the last couple of months in terms of, employee well-being and your own well-being, what's gone right, what's not gone so right, and really using that, that process of change to continually learn and to look forward.
Lovely, thanks for that. And I absolutely agree. Absolutely. That we're huge fans of collaboration, huge fans of learning from others, and being able to take that forward. To a really good point to finish up on. Becki, anything to add from yourself?
Yeah, one of the things that I find really useful is when you get anxious, or you're listening to somebody, or whatever that medium is, whether it be a podcast or the news, is think about the language that's being projected. Thinking about when people say things like try is actually quite a non-committal statement. You either do it or you don't do it. And that idea about thinking about that language and saying to yourself, well, actually, what can I do? And read about things, why people choose not to do certain things. So being able to read up about things like fear, why people don't do particular actions. There's some really good books out there. And I just find that often when you're dealing with something that makes you anxious, it's good to identify the root for which it comes from, so you're able to clear and make a clear conversation, clear the kind of concern, and recognize that concern, but also being able to say something that's got clarity to it in what you're going to do about it. So, for example, one of the things that I find is if somebody says, we don't know if we can allow people to use escalators, it's like, well, okay, but how are you going to manage that? Don't think about it, oh my goodness, how am I going to get up there? What am I going to do? Well, how are they going to manage that? Flip the narrative towards the group, not necessarily just to yourself.
Flip the narrative. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. So Amber, do you want to give a quick plug to your website details?
Yeah, so my website is www.head.works. It's quite a strange website and you can find information about our courses. We're offering online courses at the moment, specifically for the current context. We also have some brief free online workshops, and then some information about our wellbeing workshops, which can be bespoke, and our consulting services. So go check us out.
Fantastic. And to all of our listeners, you can also find information about Amber on the EMBED website. You can see the details on the screen. For those who can't, it's www.embed.org.uk. Amber is, we are pleased to say, our resident mental health and wellbeing expert for all things EMBED. So she also helps us in supporting the delivery of our services and offerings to our clients. So please do go and check her out and learn a little bit more about what she has to offer. There's just a wealth of experience in there for everybody that I would highly recommend. So thank you for joining us. Our next podcast is going to be with the wonderful Sharon Pegg, who is director at Northern Powerhouse Consulting, also an EMBED member. Like myself, she spans many sectors. We're going to be having a conversation about thriving in business as small business owners. So thank you for joining us, ladies. Thank you so much for giving your time. And to everyone listening, enjoy the long weekend and stay safe. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.